Everyone, please welcome Webster Tarpley from Washington, D.C.
Thank you. I have to thank Nick for his very kind words. The only thing I could take issue with is a somewhat slighting reference to outer boroughs. Outer boroughs, inner boroughs, where is the center after all? I'm someone who lived in Flushing, Queens for a long time. I went to PS 23, PS 20, junior high school 185, Flushing High School. My uncle was actually a New York City policeman. And to us out there in Flushing, it was always a question about where the center really was. So apart from that Manhattan-centric attitude, I'm sure we can get along fine. Now, this is my issue of tonight. I'm essentially trying to show the continuity of the 9/11 regime. The fact that the September criminals, the people inside the U.S. government, the network in the Pentagon, the CIA, the NSA, what I refer to as the secret government or the parallel government, the rogue network, the secret team, the invisible government, terms of this type, they're still in power, and they still have their agenda, which is for war, and it's now for a wider war. The wider war involves Syria, it involves Iran, it may involve North Korea, Venezuela, or other places around the world. So I'm trying to show you why September 11th is the key issue for fighting that 9/11 regime, which of course is increasingly dictatorial, and being able to undercut their plans for wider wars. And one of my underlying theses is if you're from the peace movement, you must by now face the fact that unless Bush's base is destroyed, he will continue to wage war. He'll stay in office, he'll continue to wage war. There is no amount of polemic on Iraq as such, or Syria as such, or Iran as such, that will destroy that base. The only thing that begins to erode and attrit Bush's base, the political phenomenon that allows him to make war, is to attack the 9/11 myth. The myth of the hijackers, the myth of terrorism. Back in the 1930s, Dr. Goebbels of the Nazi propaganda machine and his friends, another one by the name of Alfred Rosenberg, talked about the myth of the 20th century. They said it was nationalism. Terrorism is now the myth of the 21st century. It is the basis of all of the crimes that are perpetrated. It's the basis of this government, the Republican Party. Even down to property relations, the entire social order seems to depend on the notion of fear and terrorism. We're living in a reign of terror, and it's a nightmare from which we need to exit. And this is part of what I'm trying to do. So therefore, it's the 9/11 issue, but not as a matter of antiquarianism, not as a matter of backward-looking even history, although I hold history in extremely high regard, not history in the way that it might be misinterpreted, but rather as a key to doing things today. Now let's see if our it works. Okay, this is my book. Now some of the things in my speech are going to be obscure. I'm sorry. If they're not understandable, please buy my book. I'm not trying to make them obscure, but sometimes it's just unavoidable, especially for those who are coming in right off the freshly from not having ever been here before. This book was completed in late fall of 2004, but I'm very pleased to announce that tonight is the world premiere of the second edition. The second edition, updated to, it's actually updated to Guy Fawkes Day of last year, November 5th. We'll talk about Guy Fawkes in a minute. We just had the 400th anniversary of Anglo-American terrorism. But that was Guy Fawkes, and you'll find, I think, that the introduction, although it's not extremely long, does deal with some of the things that have, for me, now become the central features of the whole polemic against 9/11. The myth, I mean. Now, I know there are new people, and you put me in and I'm so delighted that new people are here, you put me in the position of having to do two things. One is to try to satisfy the new people who would like to have an ABC introduction to this entire thing. But then, of course, we also have here large numbers of seasoned experts who have been dealing with this for 4 years plus, I've got to try to balance those two. I would just say to the new people, you'll probably find that the beginning is going to be, once we get through some pictures, we're going to get into some other things that may seem to be a little bit confusing. That will be the able-danger question, which I regard as an important point. But then we will get to a phase of about 10 or 15 minutes where we can talk about the obvious anomalies, impossibilities, physical impossibilities of the official version. But I have to ask for everybody's patience tonight, because what I'm trying to put out is, well, it's called MyHop, right? Made it happen on purpose. That is my theoretical standpoint. I think it's important, and I'll try to show you why. It means that we're going to have to enter into a world that we never wanted to enter into, and that is the nightmare world of Pentagon acronyms, Pentagon code names, and military plans, because the key to 9/11 is not to be found in some cave in Afghanistan or in the sands of Saudi Arabia. It's to be found in the Pentagon, in Arlington, Virginia, or in Langley, Virginia, the CIA, or other bureaus of the U.S. government, and then, of course, ultimately, the Wall Street financiers who, in a general way, control what those people do. So that's where you have to look at it. And that's my truth in labeling. Made in USA. Nowhere else. Made in USA. Not in China? No, maybe. No, not even print. This actually, the book is actually printed in USA too, so get it that way. Next. Okay, my background is I come from a study in the 1970s of NATO spheres of influence terrorism. This is 1978. Who killed Aldo Moro, the Prime Minister? And the answer, as you see, is NATO intelligence, or the British, the U.S., NATO intelligence. And my standpoint on September 11th is that this is also an example of NATO spheres of influence terrorism, what you can call geopolitical terrorism, coming, however, from the NATO command in the same way that those Red Brigades who kidnapped and killed Moro were ultimately controlled by NATO intelligence. So this is the thing that I studied, and I find that this is a very, very profitable way to look at the issue. This is, of course, what we have today, the American Leviathan, right? We've got a Leviathan state breathing down our necks. Administrative fascism. It's different from the older fascism. It doesn't seem to really have that kind of street fighting aspect to it. Although when you see something like the Minutemen patrolling borders, you get an idea that the street fighting part may not be that far away. But generally, administrative fascism under the Bush regime, that was, of course, 1991, Bush the Elder, and now I think it's full-blown. That's my other book. That's the book that covers the Bush the Elder. It's the only critical biography of him ever written, I'm afraid. It's very interesting that, since Nick mentioned it, when in January 15th, 1991, we were on the verge of the Iraq War, there were indeed surface-to-air missiles placed on top of the White House, and guys with these shoulder-mounted missiles running around. But in 2001, there were none, according to most reports. So they said they went to highest alert in 2001, but they didn't choose to protect the White House, indicating my thesis that the coup faction wanted to have the option of destroying the White House. And why not? Why not? Make the whole thing more effective. And indeed, there are plans, there are indications that the plane that went down in Shanksville was doing exactly that. So we have to talk about the horror of September 11th and the fact that it has transformed international relations and politics inside this country. The problem is, for most people, it's a totally unexamined premise. How can you say we live in a new world based on something of which you know almost nothing? And believe me, we know almost nothing compared to what we need to know. The trail of terror, right? Living in a world of terror, right? The message of the Bush administration: be afraid, always be afraid, right? Franklin D. Roosevelt told us the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Now, it's a different message coming from the government. And, of course, the demonized perpetrators starting with Muhammad Atta, right, the evil incarnate in this amazingly Manichaean world that they inhabit. Now, it's not new. And as I mentioned just before, I can't talk about this, but I have another slideshow of about 2 hours that I was fortunate enough to give in Cork, Ireland, last November. A good audience, right place to give this kind of a lecture. This is Guy Fawkes, right? This is the guy who's trying to allegedly blow up the Houses of Parliament, the House of Lords, with the King, the Commons, the Lords, and everybody else, the whole elite of the country, in November.